All right, welcome back. We're continuing on. Down at the bottom of the slide, first thing we talk about is fermentation. Before we understood that microorganisms were responsible for fermentation, we were doing the process of fermentation. It's a very good process to preserve food, including making things like wine and spirits. So before we knew what the organisms were, what the process was for fermentation, we were using it. Lastly, you can see pathogens have shaped history. So if we go back to the Dutch elm disease, the potato blight, the Black Plague, even today, we have not eradicated malaria. We see that pathogens and microorganisms have definitely shaped history. All right, so one topic that I do like to cover is the theory of evolution and make sure that we understand what the term evolution means. Evolve simply means to change, okay? So to change over time. So evolution is explaining to us that if you take a look at the history of the planet and you take a look at the life on planet Earth, that you're going to see over time that species don't stay constant, that new species evolve. We see that organisms adapt to their environment. We see that the environment selects for beneficial features over maybe adverse or not beneficial features. So over time, we see an accumulation of those changes that are best benefiting the organism. Now, does that mean that we don't have mutations or we don't carry diseases? No, we do. It's just that we are favoring those organisms that are the most fit to the environment, if you will. So when we think about the theory of evolution, we first have to tell ourselves there's a difference between a hypothesis and a theory. A hypothesis is simply a statement about your prediction about something. I'll hear on TV and movies someone say, I have a theory about something. No, you don't. You have a hypothesis. A theory has been essentially repeatedly supported through hypothesis testing. So we have failed to reject a theory, just like we failed to reject a hypothesis. Theories really are overarching premises that help explain numerous hypotheses from different fields. So when we think about theory of evolution, we're thinking about geology, we're thinking biology, and we're thinking chemistry. So it's not just a biological response, it literally is an overarching explanation for hypotheses from several different fields. So when we see something saying, or like the theory of evolution or the germ theory, we know that this is the best way that we understand from the accumulation of all our research what's going on around us. All right, so some other examples here. We talked about alcohol, bread production. So we use yeast, which, yes, is a fungus and a microorganism, to make bread. And then the last bullet there in cheese production. So if you like blue cheese and brie and some of the more exotic types of cheeses, then you're going to thank bacteria and fungi for making those flavors that you like. All right, a couple of other things. I do want to mention something about the second bullet. So one of those microorganisms we definitely have benefited from and really revolutionized how we treat disease these days was the discovery of an antibiotic made by a fungus. The fungus is called penicillium, and penicillium makes an antibiotic called penicillin. It is not the only antibiotic that's made by fungi, nor are fungi the only things that make antibiotics. Bacteria also make antibiotics. And the reason that they are making antibiotics is to outcompete other microorganisms so they themselves can live and survive and reproduce. So when you see the prescription for penicillin, think about the fungus called penicillium. All right. More in recent or modern history, we know that we are using microorganisms in a field called genetic engineering. So essentially what we do in genetic engineering is that we can genetically modify organisms. Now, The way that we do this is not only by using the small circular DNA called a plasmid in bacteria, but we can also use that plasmid to take up, if you will, genes from other organisms. So then we can put that into the circular piece of DNA and then introduce it into a cell. So if you've heard about genetically modified food, essentially that's kind of the basic understanding of how we got this foreign gene into maybe corn or maybe into sugar beets or something like that. But a really important use of microorganisms has been in the making of human medicines, particularly insulin. My dad was a diabetic, and he would often get insulin from sheep. And essentially, you can imagine raising animals, you might have animals yourself, raising these animals essentially to slaughter them to harvest the pancreas for insulin for diabetics was a very, very, very costly process. The cost of insulin could be greatly reduced by taking that gene for human insulin, recombining it with a circular piece of DNA from bacteria, and then essentially growing these bacteria in a lab in test tubes and having it crank out lots of human insulin. So super important to understand that genetic recombination really has allowed us to more economically treat some diseases. The last thing here, let me just move my face, is bioremediation. So maybe you've heard of Superfund sites, or we've all heard of oil spills. The Deep Horizon oil spill was one in recent history. And so microorganisms are really pretty non-discriminating when it comes to what they like to eat. And what that means is they will consume toxic waste and convert it into much less harmful waste as a byproduct. So we can use microorganisms for bioremediation. Okay, moving on. Okay, another concept check. Oh, typo, true or false. The theory of evolution is not widely accepted among scientists because it still remains unproven. I mean, assuming that everyone thought to themselves false, because it has been highly accepted and supported over time and has not been refuted thus far. All right, learning outcome 1.1 continued, state some ways microorganisms cause harm. So we talked a little bit earlier about the idea of microbes that cause disease. Not all microbes cause disease. We just seem to kind of fixate on, the negative aspects of bacteria, but there's lots of beneficial uses of bacteria. So if you take a look at the slide, so the World Health Organization, WHO, estimates that there are 10 billion new infections caused every year by microbes. Infectious diseases are among the most common cause of death in the US and worldwide. And the very last thing goes back to one of the things I mentioned, malaria. The CDC reports that a child dies from malaria every 30 seconds. This statistics has changed slightly due to a project that was initiated by President Barack Obama to try to eradicate mosquitoes in some of the African countries. Tanzania was one of those countries, in order to eradicate malaria in those countries. All right, so emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases. So we know with COVID-19, that sort of kind of hit us on the head of, yes, we are still susceptible to very virulent microorganisms that cause disease. There's some things there, AIDS, Hep C, viral encephalitis, some other things. But certainly we know that microorganisms can continue to be a problem. We think about vaccines and whether to vaccinate or not vaccinate. If we're not vaccinating, then we're essentially allowing some of those diseases like polio to come back. It has essentially been eradicated. All right, some diseases once considered to be non-infectious now have been found to have a microbial cause. So I'm going to leave this for you. I'm not going to go into it in a lot of great detail. Certainly, we have often thought, oh, it's just, genetics, it's just bad luck. Oh, you worry too much and you eat too much hot food, so therefore you have stomach ulcers. We know that there's a bacterium now, Helicobacter pylori, that causes gastric ulcers. All right, then moving on to table 1.2, top causes of death. Top figure is the US, bottom figure is worldwide. And if you look at the bottom, there's a key here. And the pink circle means diseases most clearly caused by microorganisms. And then the blue, not currently known to have an infectious cause. So in the US, you're going to see that in general, we are looking at, we've done a really great job at controlling microorganismal disease. The pink there indicates influenza and pneumonia are top causes of death associated with microorganisms. And worldwide, we see that lower respiratory diseases are caused by microorganisms. Of course, diarrhea, if you think about traveler's diarrhea, if you in fact have had it when you've traveled. But thinking about worldwide, those people who do not have adequate drinking water free of microorganisms is a huge problem. And then lastly, you see tuberculosis. Okay, true or false? Diseases such as heart disease, gastric ulcers, diabetes, and multiple sclerosis can have a microbial cause. And I believe you probably remember from that slide that that answer would be true. Okay, explain the general understanding of the mechanisms of food spoilage and disease before the mid-1800s until the discovery of microorganisms. So let's take a look. So when we go back in time, we know, as I mentioned before, that we were fermenting foods. We just didn't understand the underlying process that was occurring with the use of microbes. So people observed the results of microbial activity, but did not really understand how microorganisms were involved. The last bullet, infectious diseases, were often attributed to curses or bad air. So luckily, we had some very curious individuals that really wanted to investigate. So we see that Leeuwenhoek essentially did his work as a Dutch draper and a janitor. And he made this, let me see if I can, maybe you can see it. He made this primitive microscope where he could put a specimen on the tip of a sharp point needle, and he had a lens here, and then he could use this screw to kind of move it back and forth to get it into focus. He ground lenses to make microscopes, and he was the first person to actually document microorganisms that he, by seeing them. And this was, as it says, the late 1600s, early 1700s. If we go on, my favorite is Semmelweis, a Hungarian physician. He worked in a hospital where women were giving birth, and he found that those women giving birth with the help of physicians were more likely to die in childbirth or the result of childbirth compared to those women who had been who birthed with a midwife. So he proposed that the physicians needed to wash their hands because it turns out those physicians were also in the morgue. And so they were carrying with them microorganisms from the bodies in the morgue and bringing it to and essentially infecting women who were giving birth. Unfortunately, doctors felt it was heresy to accuse them of carrying microorganisms and killing women. And so they had locked him away in a prison. He got beaten very badly and died of the same infection that he was trying to prevent in the hospitals. But his contribution was super important because he proposed that chlorinated lime could be used essentially as a disinfectant for doctors to ensure that their hands were clean when they were delivering babies.